At 119 knots, the plane can become airborne. But something goes wrong. They suddenly lose speed.
Christ, we're not going to make it!
Tower, Delta 191 Heavy, out here in the rain. Feels good.
191 Heavy.
We're not getting any bad warnings from the weather or from other pilots, which we rely on as they come through it.
As the pilots of Delta 191 prepare for landing, the rain begins to fall harder. At the foot of the runway, one of the most ferocious types of storm cloud stands in their way.
Before landing check.
Landing gear.
Down, 3 green.
At the time, the type of storm the Delta crew is approaching barely has a name. John McCarthy is one of the world's leading experts on these storms.
It is a tiny thing, meteorologically speaking, compared to a big storm or a snowstorm or a hurricane. It's just like a needle in a haystack.
The needle is a microburst, one of the deadliest and at the time most poorly understood weather phenomena. They've taken down airliners before, but as Delta 191 makes its approach, there are no warning systems that can effectively alert the pilots of the danger they're in.
Prior to 1985, the radars on board the aircraft were built to detect thunderstorms, essentially heavy areas of precipitation. They were not effective. They weren't not even designed to detect the microburst.
If you're at the kitchen sink and you turn on the water and it goes straight down and it splashes out in all directions. And that's kind of what a microburst is, except that it is extremely bad news if you're an airplane flying through it.
When a plane hits a microburst, it encounters a complex and powerful set of conditions. Downdrafts and tailwinds batter a plane. It's a deadly combination. Just short of the runway, Delta 191 flies into the microburst.
You're gonna lose it all of a sudden. There it is. Push it up. Push it way up. Way up. Way up. Way up. Hang on to the son of... He's gonna crash.
The pilots of Delta Flight 191 did their very best to recover from this situation, and it didn't work out.
I must have caught sight of him just at the last millisecond, and he cartwheeled into the tank in just an instant, and then of course there was fire, not a ball of fire, but a wall of fire.
Just 27 people survived the crash of Delta 191. 137 people are killed. After the crash of Delta 191, the Federal Aviation Administration races to develop technology that can prevent microbursts from killing again.
If there is one crash that we can look back on now and say, this made things safer because we learned from it, it was Delta 191.
Investigators know the Northwest Airlink Flight 5719 pilots could not have heard a low-altitude warning. But they still don't understand why the plane was descending so rapidly. They wonder if weather conditions may have played a role. They check the temperatures and the type of precipitation encountered by the turboprop.
These are prime conditions for icing. Plane would have descended right through it.
Investigators need to know how bad the icing conditions were just before the crash.
Just wondering if you have a couple of minutes.
They talk to other pilots who flew into Hibbing that night.
So you were aware of the potential for icing during your approach into Hibbing?
The pilots tell DeLacy they faced moderate icing conditions.
But why would these two pilots start their descent so late?
They also describe a common technique used to prevent ice accumulation. It now now seems the rapid descent was not due to a loss of control caused by icing. Instead, it looks like it was part of a deliberate strategy to avoid icing. Finally, investigators get the evidence they've been waiting for: the cockpit voice recording.
All right, everybody ready? Play the tape.
The investigators listen carefully to the recording. It's what is not said that alarms them the most.
Why isn't the first officer making his altitude callouts?
First Officer Erickson should be telling his captain how close they are to their minimum altitude and warning him when they descend past it. But he does neither.
Gear down.
Flaps 20.
He never told the captain how close they were getting to the ground.
Captain Fallitz has his hands full landing the plane. He expects his first officer to keep an eye on their altitude. But on this flight, the first officer never once reports the altitude as the plane speeds closer and closer to the ground. The CDR leads investigators to wonder, was the loss of 18 lives in the Hibbing crash due to the failings of an inexperienced young pilot?
Come on, I've got an idea.
With little data from the FDR, NTSB investigator John McAdill comes up with an unusual way to analyze the power coming from Flight 90's engines by analyzing the sound they made. Jet engines contain turbines that make different sounds depending on how quickly they're spinning. When the engine needs more power, the turbine spins faster and the frequency of the sound changes.
You ready to go? Yeah.
The sound of Flight 90's engines should tell McAdill how much power they were generating, and thanks to the unique design of the 737, with its engines mounted close to the cockpit, he already has a recording of the sound he needs. They play back the cockpit voice recorder in a soundproof room.
120. V1. Easy.
Can you take the stick shaker out?
Forward. Forward. Come on.
Lose the crew voices.
Forward. Forward.
The technician eliminates the other sounds in the cockpit one by one, until all that's left is the sound of the engines. The results are dramatic. Investigators now know that the Boeing 737's engines weren't running at full power during takeoff. What they don't know is why. McAdill has no hard evidence that the sensor was blocked, but he decides to follow a hunch. He uses a piece of tape to simulate the effect of ice blocking the engine sensor. He recreates the actions of the pilots on the day of the flight.
Okay, start her up.
And he records the sound of the engines from inside the cockpit.
Keep throttling up.
He increases power until the engine gauges match the target set by the crew of Flight 90.
Got it.
Blocking the sensors on the test flight should create the same reduction in engine performance as on Flight 90. Both engines should sound identical.
Okay, let's see what we've got.
McAdill compares the sound of his test flight to the engine noise captured during Flight 90's takeoff.
That's a perfect match.
Investigators believe the ice on the wings degraded the plane's performance when combined with low engine power, though. It was enough to rob the pilots of the lift they needed to climb. The Air Florida disaster was a wake-up call for better flight safety in winter conditions. In the aftermath of this accident, northern airports around the world improved de-icing facilities so that pilots can de-ice near the runway just before takeoff. Powerful technology now clears runways faster, helping airports avoid long delays after a heavy snowfall. Since the Air Florida disaster, pilots and regulators better understand the risk of winter flight. While investigators wait for the black box data, they hope to learn more about Flight 1713 from the controller on duty at the time of the accident.
Okay, let's take it from the top.
Look, first I heard from them, they were already at the runway. I mean, it kind of took me by surprise, actually.
Continental 594.
Tower.
The controller thought the next flight in line was Continental 594, but he was unable to make contact with that plane.
Denver Tower, the number 1 on the runway is
Continental 1713.
1713. Are you an MD-80?
Negative, sir. DC-9.
I don't know how 1713 got there, but there he is.
The controller explains that all of a sudden, Flight 1713 reported being at the runway.
Should have gone from the gate to the de-icing facility, then taxied to the runway. But first I heard from him, he was already in position at the runway.
The revelation leaves investigators with a crucial question. Did Flight 1713 neglect to de-ice before heading to the runway? Ice on the surface of a wing can be deadly. It can disrupt the wing's ability to produce lift, leading to an aerodynamic stall. That's why in winter conditions, planes must be de-iced before every takeoff.
For aerodynamic reasons, you don't want that any ice adhering. It distorts the airflow and has an adverse effect on lift or the airplane's ability to fly.
Investigators check with a de-icing supervisor.
So it was fully de-iced then out to the runway.
His records show that Flight 1713 did de-ice before going to the runway. Investigators are no closer to understanding why the plane couldn't climb out safely. But they are very close to hearing the final moments inside the cockpit. The recording is intact.
It's like going through a car wash.
Unmistakably de-icing spray. That's it. De-icing complete at 1:47.
Start them both.
Okay.
Investigators now know exactly when the pilots restarted their engines and left the de-icing bay. They wonder if there were any other factors that could have affected the plane before takeoff.
We have a cold front running through here. What were the weather advisories telling pilots?
Dickinson hopes the experience of other pilots that night can shed light on what happened to United Express 6291.
Rime, mixed icing between 2,000 and 19,000 feet.
Did any other flights fly through it?
If other pilots flew through the same icing conditions, they might have experienced a similar problem.
Yes, 2, just before 6291 was due in.
Okay, let's talk to them.
In this case, there were planes flying in the general area, and some of them landed at the airport in Columbus. So it's important to talk to these pilots to find out what the conditions were on their descent.
And it was rime ice?
The pilot of a plane that landed 1 minute before Flight 6291 was due in remembers descending through freezing drizzle.
What do you think you picked up? About a ½ inch? And it didn't give you any trouble? Okay, thanks. Hey, same amount of ice, but no trouble.
The pilots of other planes reported similar conditions, but had no problems landing.
The fact that several airplanes landed preceding this airplane under similar weather conditions means the weather should not have precluded a safe landing at the airport.
Thanks for coming in. So you left at 7?
And when the investigators speak to United Express pilots who earlier in the day flew the same plane through similar weather,
And you had to de-ice?
they reported no difficulties with the plane's de-icing system.
We looked at everything that was involved in the weather situation. They should have been able to fly through this moderate icing and land successfully.
Aero Air Flight 1285 is nearing the end of a 6,000-mile journey from Egypt to the United States. The DC-8 is on its way to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, via Germany and Newfoundland. On board are 8 crew members and 248 passengers. Most of them are U.S. soldiers with the famed 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. At 5:30 in the morning, the Douglas DC-8 lands at Gander International Airport on the eastern edge of Newfoundland, Canada.
They had to refuel in Gander before they could complete the flight into Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Gander Tower.
Big A950, we've completed refueling and pre-flight checks. Requesting taxi to runway 31.
Big A950, winds at 290 at 4 knots. Takeoff now, runway 22.
A last-minute change puts Aero Air on a different runway than originally planned.
9,900 feet, take off to the south, we're good.
Copy that, Gander, runway 22.
Big A950, you are cleared for takeoff.
Merry Christmas.
Roger that, Gander Tower. And a Merry Christmas to you, too.
The DC-8 accelerates to takeoff speed.
80 knots. Check. B1. Rotate.
Aero Air 1285 lifts off from Gander Airport at 6:46 a.m. But just seconds later,
She's flying like a pig. Positive rate? Negative?
I'm sure for the last few seconds, those soldiers knew that there was a serious problem in hand.
What's your altitude? Pull up. Come on, airspeed. Airspeed. Watch the trees.
First Officer Connolly pulled the nose back, trying to get the plane in the air. What he didn't realize was he was sealing their fate. The DC-8 was already on the verge of a stall. Pulling the nose up only made things worse. The aircraft's weight had been underestimated, its lift compromised by ice on the wings. A fatal combination.
If you take one of the factors out, if you take the ice out and have the same weight, maybe you don't have the accident. If you take out the heavy weight and still have the icing, maybe you won't have the accident. But if you have them combined together, you have the accident.
June 24th, 1982. British Airways Flight 9 cruises through the sky over Indonesia. While many of the passengers have been traveling for almost a day, the crew is fresh. They took control at the last stopover in Kuala Lumpur. Captain Eric Moody got his first taste of flying at the age of 16 when he took a gliding lesson. He was one of the first ever trained on the 747.
Roger, check with Jakarta.
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9 over Halim at level 370.
Speedbird 9, roger.
First Officer Roger Greaves has been a co-pilot for more than 6 years. Barry Townley Freeman has been a flight engineer on these aircraft for just a little longer.
I'd not flown with Eric before, or Barry. That was the first time we'd actually met on that flight.
As the jet flies over the city of Jakarta, it's cruising at more than 36,000 feet and has been in the air for an hour and a half. Captain Moody checks his weather radar. It shows smooth sailing for the next 300 miles.
All right, Roger, it's all clear. Just keep your eyes open. I'll be back in a moment. Just got to use the lube.
In the cockpit, the flight takes an unsettling turn.
Barry and I were just sitting there minding the shop. Pitch dark night, of course. And then we started to get these pinpricks of light on the windscreen.
St. Elmo's fire? I don't think so. It's not moving the way it should.
St. Elmo's fire is a natural phenomenon that's sometimes seen when planes fly through highly charged thunderclouds. But there aren't supposed to be any thunderclouds tonight.
I think we better get the captain back up here.
It smelled like sort of a sulfuric electrical smell. And I went on that flight deck expecting to hear that we had some electrical smoke somewhere on the aircraft. But nothing was further from the truth.
When did it start?
Well, just after you stepped out.
Anything on radar?
No, it's clear, not a cloud. Oh my lord, look at engine 4! It's lit up somehow. Captain, have a look at number 1.
It's the same on my side.
None of the crew have ever seen anything like this before, but the light show is just the beginning. Their bizarre flight is about to take a terrifying turn for the worse. As the fire engulfs the engines, one of them revs loudly and flames out.
Engine failure, number 4.
Fire action, number 4.
Checklist, power and gear.
Set.
Thrust lever.
Closed.
Start lever.
Off.
And then the unthinkable happens.
Number 2, engine's gone.
All right then, begin the engine shutdown.
No, wait! They've all gone. All 4 engines have failed.
The other 3 just went out almost immediately. And that's when it begins to be a serious emergency.
BEA Flight 609 prepares for its third takeoff attempt from Munich Airport. The plane, carrying the Manchester United Football Club, is drawing attention from inside the terminal.
You've got to remember these are the Busby babes. They're laughing and joking all the time, that sort of thing. But now they're quite quiet and there's a lot of tension there in the air.
Little Johnny Berry, he said, we're all going to get frickin' killed here. And Liam Whelan said, well, if it happens, I'm ready. At that point, I opened my tie.
Ignition boost switches off.
Ignition boost switches off.
Wings still look good. No need to de-ice.
609 Zulu. Uniform, I'm ready to taxi. Over.
Beeline 609, your clearance void, if not airborne, by 04, time now 02.
Roger, understand. Valid till 04.
Captain Thane has just 2 minutes before the window for takeoff closes. If this third attempt is not successful, the flight may be canceled, and his famous passengers will be grounded in Munich.
Munich 609 Zulu uniform is ready for takeoff.
Roger.
The runway is more than 2,000 yards long. Even with their plan for a gradual acceleration, the Elizabethan should be able to lift off just past 1,300 yards.
So for the third time that day, they actually lined up the aircraft with the centre line, got the permission, clearance to take off, and they're away.
Full power. Full power. Temperatures and pressures okay. Port surging slightly.
He experienced a bit of this engine surging, which he retarded the throttle slightly and then advanced it again.
Full power again.
Both engines sound an even note, and we're going down the runway now for a takeoff. Everything seems okay.
Pilots know what they're doing, boys.
I thought there's more people in this plane more frightened than what I am.
V1.
Velocity 1 is the speed at which a takeoff cannot safely be abandoned. The point of no return.
Raymond now is waiting, is anticipating now Thane to call out 119 knots, which is V2.
At 119 knots, the plane can become airborne. But something goes wrong. They suddenly lose speed.
Christ, we're not going to make it!
There was no screaming, there was no shouting, there was nothing like that at all. Darkness and daylight and sparks and thumps and smacks. And you can't describe it.